YouTube live stream on Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. Today we're going to talk about HDL. He's the person that recently died and is communicating to J.S.M. Ward. And it's about meeting an officer who's risen from hell, his guardian angel, and time in his level. So hopefully this will be extremely interesting about information from the other side. But first, please subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, give us a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm. It helps us greatly spread Spiritism and information about the spirit world. So let's get into it. Now this is interesting. So this has happened in March 2nd, 1914. And this is Ward saying what's happened during this vision he had. He says, I found myself seated by the side of a river, and beside me was HJL. And then Ward said, Carrie wants to know whether you can take off the clothes and laying them aside, get into others. Do you understand my meaning? And HJL, who is a spirit, said, of course, I perceive the idea in your mind. The clothes are made into their present form by my will. When I wish them to assume another shape, ergo when I am on the earth plane and wish them to resemble my former earth clothes, they do so. I don't take them off and change them as you do on earth. Our clothes do not wear out, of course. They remain as we think them. And if we want to change them, we think the change, and there are the new clothes. So this corresponds with Spiritism. Everything they say about Spiritism, this corresponds with what other Spiritist writers have written. Now, if you'd like to understand and get more into Spiritism, read the book that started it all. Allan Kardec codified the Spirit book, which is 119 questions that he got from different mediums talking to, in different geographical locations throughout Europe. And he didn't use the answers unless he had the same or similar answers. So, and of course, then after Allan Kardec, as I say, there are many other medium writers besides Allan Kardec. There is Leon Denis, Yvonne Pierre, Chico Xavier, Divaldo Franco, Yvonne Pierre. So there's quite a few, and I'll bring those in. And I'll give examples from quite a few of them. So in the books by Chico Xavier, to start with, is they talk about clothes, right? Now, no solar, they're given clothes because they don't, which is very at the bottom level of heaven. And they're given clothes because they don't yet know how to use their mind to create them. But as you go higher and you learn more, because it depends, you create your own clothes. You learn that even in that lesson too. They'll give classes also in the book, Violets on the Window, where they're taught how to make their clothes, and other things, taught how to volatilate, which is move with the speed of thought. So again, this corresponds extremely well with what is said in Spiritist writings. This is not a Spiritist writing. This is a person who's had these visions in the beginning of the 20th century in England. This is why this is so interesting. These things, when you see the different, you have the writings by Allan Kardec in French. You've got a lot of these Spiritist authors in Portuguese. J.S.M is also in English. He's in England, and he wrote his around 1910 and onwards, and wasn't published till later. So you see that these aren't people that are they're not making this stuff up, because so much corresponds with others. And the same thing, you'll see that in near-death experiences, where people say about clothes and how you can create them. And in fact, in the books by Chico Xavier and the Andre Louis series, they talk about clothes, and then as you can change colors. And in the books by J.S.M, they talk about clothes as they go by buildings or trees. The clothes will then change colors as the buildings change colors. It all depends on how you set things up. So it's a very dynamic environment. And in parties, they have a couple paragraphs from one of the books by Andre Louis, where people, they wear what they want, and their clothes change with their mood. So it's a land which is beyond any fantasy book you've ever read because it's so different, where everyone can think and change things with their mind. Now, you don't have perfect power because your influence on the environment around you is measured and balanced against other people's with their ideas of what the environment is like. And that's why there's a law of affinity. We're placed with like. And therefore you have this group think a method of what these levels of heaven are, and then you absorb yourself into that group and you go along with what their suppositions are and their constructs are. So a lot of people say, well, heaven is whatever you think it is. There's truth to that, but you have to look at the fact that you're influenced by these other thoughts, and you're influenced by superior spirits who come down, and their thoughts are dominant. So let's go on. So then he also said, well, my daughter said she saw you picking stars. He goes, which were flowers to you. She had also this, she's very young, like a lot of young children. She had this sight. And HGL said, yeah, I often pick flowers, and I suppose they looked as bright as stars to her, and she mixed them up with the stars, which she saw with her mortal sight, as distinct from her spiritual sight, which she sees me. And he goes, so what happens with those little stars? What do you do when they die? He goes, well, no, they don't die when you pick them. They are forms, and they still retain these forms, even if picked. They are simply transferred from the plant to my vase, but they do not die in the vase any more than when they are on the plant. Now, what I've told in other books is that what happens is after a time, they simply vanish. They don't decay. They don't get rotten, right? Like we do. We have to throw flowers out. No, they just simply vanish. So, very interesting, is it not? And he says they're forms. So this is why I say over and over again, this is why we're on earth, is to discipline our mind, because our mind changes everything in heaven. So let's carry on. He says, now for my narrative. This is from HJL. A few days after I met P, my guide took me to see the passing up of a soul from hell. And his guide went with me, and we found it was the officer. He goes, I find it hard to make you understand how we got there, but suddenly we were at the edge of hell, and we seemed to be on this dry, barren, rocky edge. Behind us were black rocks and hard and stony ground. The ground was sloped up towards us from behind. In front of us broke off abruptly. Now this terrible cliff was made far more awful by the fact that at its edge all light ceased. The light seemed to be tiny particles of mist, and at the very edge these seemed to pile themselves into a great wall against the darkness. There was no intermingling of light and dark as on earth, simply this awful darkness, which seemed as if it were a solid curtain or even a wall against which light piled itself up but could not penetrate. So you read about these, not so dramatic, I've read, as far as boundaries. Now, in other books, you read about boundaries between, let's take levels of heaven. And if you're a spirit on, let's say, level 1, and you want to go to level 2, and you start walking towards a higher level, you really can't, you don't feel comfortable, because the brightness, it's the light is so bright, you can't see, and your whole body doesn't feel comfortable. And therefore you retreat. And then, as also in the books by Chico Xavier, when they go down into the umbral, or lower zone, as they say in Portuguese, or the dark abyss, which I believe here is he's talking about hell. So the dark abyss is the purgatory. There's nobody in this dark abyss or purgatory forever. When you change your attitude, you leave. Is below the crust of the earth. From the crust of the earth to the lower levels of heaven is the lower zone, or umbral in Portuguese. And as you go down to the umbral, it gets darker and darker. And as you go down lower levels, it's dark. Now, remember, it's dark here on earth for many of them, because it's not as bright as where they came from. They're used to a much more brighter situation, more colors, everything. We are told we can only see 1/8 of the world around us because our senses are so limited. Now, when they go down even into the dark abyss, or hell, as he says, it's much darker. Now, it's not to them right now, it looks black, right? Completely obscure. But to the people in it, they get used to it. They see it's not bright, but it's, it's like twilight or even a little bit past twilight, maybe with a full moon. They can see. So it kind of gives you an understanding. So then when he says, my guide spoke, go to the uttermost edge of that rocky cliff and stretch out your hand into the darkness. He said, I went to the edge, and as I did so, I felt the hand of my guide resting on my shoulder from behind to steady me. My hand went into the darkness and was immediately lost to sight. I could see my arm as far as the part when it entered the darkness, but beyond I could see nothing, nor could I feel any sensation in the hand, save only at the place where it entered the darkness. It was more than darkness, what can be felt. It was a darkness which destroys feeling. At the part where my arm entered the darkness, I felt a narrow band of intense cold, numbing and yet burning. May I withdraw my arm? I asked the guide. And the answer was yes. I promptly withdrew it and was really thankful to find it was undamaged. Why this darkness and cold? I inquired. My guide replied, the light of faith does not exist here, and there is also no love of God. As you are now a spirit, you need the spiritual light and warmth, just as on earth you need physical warmth and light. So let me stop there for a second. Now, there is love of God and Jesus everywhere. Jesus will go down in any area he is, and he loves the people, even in the souls in the dark abyss, as they say, hell. Now, this could just be an easy way for him to understand it, right? Because spirit guides and guardian angels will try and speak into the language which is current to your culture and thinking. So they don't want to introduce new concepts too radically. So therefore, I think that's why he said that, because over and over you'll see in spiritist literature that no one is all good or all bad, and therefore there is, droplets, maybe more of goodness in those souls down in that lower dark abyss, and that will come out at certain times. And that this officer who he's going to meet has gone on that journey. He wants to leave that place. So then he goes on. Slowly, the walls of darkness began to sway to and fro. As it advanced towards the light in one place, it receded in another, and the light pressed in and out. There was no interpenetration, simply undulating line instead of a straight one. At this moment grew more and more violent. I sprang back from the cliff, fearing that a fold of darkness might engulf me. So here we have the boundary between the lower zone and the dark abyss, which they call hell, which is more a type of purgatory. So let's talk about that for a second. Why are these people grouped in there? So the natural law of affinity, where like attracts like, is the great filter that separates heaven and hell and all strata in between. The Spirit's book states in question 1012, the second question, heaven and hell then, as men have imagined them, have no existence. And the answer is they are only symbols. There are happy and unhappy spirits everywhere. Nevertheless, as we have also told you, spirits of the same order are brought together by sympathy. But when they are perfect, they can meet together wherever they will. So think about that for a second. So, there's hell, but it's not hell because God said this is hell. It appears to be hell because the people in there have been brought together to make it a hellish or purgatory type place. Let me carry on with what H.A.L. is talking about. But my guide said, stand firm. That darkness cannot reach us. There is too much faith here. And so it was. For through the folds of darkness, several times swept up to the land on either side of the spot where we were standing. It never engulfed us, and we were able to realize the awful depth of the cliff, which seemed almost unscalable, but the light gave comparatively little illumination. Suddenly, out of the darkness between us, a ball of light began to emerge. and rapidly mounting, we saw it was a glorious spirit of light. As he rose from the depth, the darkness seemed to fall off from him, to use a homely simile, like water from a duck's back. Having climbed over the edge of the cliff onto its top, he lay down and stretched his arm down into the darkness. It vanished up to his shoulder, but gradually he withdrew it, and soon we saw his hand grasp that of another. The newcomer's hand was not bright and shiny like his, but dark and dirty, with a pallid and unhealthy tinge. Soon there struggled up beside him, slowly and painfully, a most miserable object. His eyes were covered with a kind of bandage. He fell to the ground beside his guide, who rose to his feet and gently helped him to rise. So the spirit guide, who is a higher spirit, and this is what they do. There's many stories about this from Andre Louis, psychograph by Chico Xavier, and also by G. Val Owen, where teams of spirits will go down into the lower zone, the umbral, and even further down. So this is one of these good souls. There's guardian angels here that help us here. They're incarnated on earth. But please remember, even for those souls on the umbral or the dark abyss, there are good, clean, spiritist outposts and spirits who want to help them out, because every soul is important to Jesus and the spirit world. They want to bring all these people. They want everyone to advance someday to be a pure spirit. Even those people that have been down in purgatory for thousands of years, and they say, I've read one where they said some people have been there for 10,000 years, that they want someday they too will rise up and become a pure spirit. So then he said, the newcomer wore a dark gray ragged garment which was covered with stains and seemed to have, as it were, patches of darkness still clinging to it. His hands and face were also stained and dirty. Oh, this terrible light, he moaned. I can see it even through this bandage. To us, it was a very murky light, most like that seen in the London fog. So there you have a description of light down in this lower zone just before the dark abyss. It was very murky, right? And then, the spirit says, how foul his clothes are, I said at HAL to P. He goes, yes, to us, yes. But if he could see them, they would appear to him unwontedly clean. I expect to you, your clothes appear quite clean. Yes. He goes, well, I can see many stains on them, and I have no doubt to my guide, mine also appear foul. And I felt very humbled by this remark and remained silent. So this is one of the great truths, and this is very important. So a high spirit looking at a lower spirit can see the dark patches of someone who has still primitive emotions and imperfections within them. So if we could see ourselves like that, we would see dark spots all around us. And our spirit clothes, let's say, would appear to have stains. And then if you went to the second level of heaven, and to you and your friends on that second level of heaven, you'd all appear fine, right? But then a superior spirit will come to you and see some of the imperfections, let's say, that would appear on you. And that doesn't mean they would think, oh, I'm superior to you. No, they've all been through that, right? And they all want to help the next person rise up. And again, so when they're in hell and they think that they have these wonderful garments on, to other spirits that have gone down in there to help others, they look like they're just rags. Their bodies look misshapen. Some of their heads look more like maybe wolves, or some of them are very large and their shoulders are not straight. All of these things, they appear to them, to the superior spirits, as they really are in their own mind with all these primitive emotions. But to themselves, they appear fine. And again, this is why a lot of people, when they die and they're into the lower zone, and to them everyone appears just normal because they haven't really learned how to do that spirit sight yet. They don't understand why no one's paying attention to them. So, so then he says to this man that just was there, he stepped forward and he helped him. He goes, I'm happy indeed in being allowed to greet you on your entrance into this new realm. And then the man just came out, is that you, my master? Is it indeed good of you to come and welcome me? But this light is terrible. I long for the darkness again. And he was answered, oh, that will soon affect you less. This is a friend of mine who has come to welcome and help you. And he came with me. And I took the other hand of the man, whose henceforth I shall call by the name of the officer, by which you already know him. And I'll go into much more. There's a whole separate section of this book about the story of the officer and what he went through in hell, as he calls it, the dark abyss. It's very interesting. And it tells you a lot about how we use our minds, even in down there. We led him slowly down the slope and seated ourselves on the ground. Here he told me who he was on earth, which I have repeated to you briefly, and something of his life in hell. The latter I shall not give you now, as he will give it himself in due course. We stayed like this for a long time. It seemed equal to several days, but at length, when he told us much about himself, his guide spoke. By telling your evil life and something of what you have suffered, you have made it possible for your eyes to bear the light without the bandage. He then removed it, and the officer sank to the ground and covered his eyes with his hand. My guide then spoke, we must now return. What of the officer? I inquired. He will follow us, but more slowly. He cannot fly yet, which is volitation, as they call it, but will have to climb painfully up to us. We then rose in the air. In what seemed in no time, we were back in these now familiar surroundings. Now, I gather from the officer, who arrived a short time later, it seemed like a few days, that he had to cross a kind of stony desert, which mounted up to a range of hills, where he had to climb to the crest of these. He found they sloped down, but slightly towards a plain, and that plain was where we dwell. While crossing this plain, he was haunted by the most awful visions of his former evil life, similar to, but far more intense and terrible than, those I saw and suffered from. So it's H.L. talking about how he suffered from his vision after he passed over. It happens to all of us. We go through what we think we did wrong. But a few days, as it were, to him it seemed years. The visions haunt him even as they do me, but far more fiercely, and as yet they are still in the nightmare state, which I described as assailing me at first. They have not yet sorted themselves out as they did for me. He has, therefore, of course, not yet started going to school. In short, he is only just in our realm. This now enables you to understand the spiritual condition of the three persons who are trying to communicate with you from here. I feel that you cannot realize how intense all these experiences are. For example, the awful horror of that darkness I cannot convey to you, and even if I did, you could not convey it to others on earth. It was a horror which seemed to choke and freeze me. It was awful beyond measure. So let's stop there for a second. Awful beyond measure. Now, when I say that thought is action in the spirit world, and thought is really reality. And one of the spirits talking to Jiva said it best. He says that when we're on an incarnate earth, we are in an objective environment. And therefore he means that the wall is a wall, a bridge is a bridge. If you think there's something else, it doesn't make a difference. It's objective. Then when you go on the other side, it's subjective. There are logical constructs. Things are what you think they are. Now, this is great in many cases because you can create with your mind once you are trained. But also for people in hell, purgatory, the dark abyss, I should say, and the lower zones, that when someone does something painful to you, you think it's really pain. If you think you have pain, you are in pain. Even though you can be stabbed through the heart, you can be chopped up into little pieces, you will not bleed and you will not die. You are immortal. You are a logical construct, but you will feel an immense amount of pain. What else gives us pain is our memories of what we have done wrong. We are all unavoidably have important aspects within us, and that is our conscience, which is the great law library that is given to us by God and stays with us in the spirit realm and here on earth. That's why I many, many times say, follow your conscience. In Allan Kardec's book, Heaven and Hell, he describes our choices after we return to the spirit world. This is what our choices are. Actually, is a quote, there are only two alternatives for a spirit: temporary punishment, allotted according to its wrongs, or recompense according to its merits. The weighing of good versus bad deeds is a recurring theme in people's NDEs, near-death experiences. So I'm saying all these things come in. Again, in the book Heaven and Hell, there's a whole section titled The Penal Code of the Future Life. Now, before I get off of NDEs, I'd like to say is that in my book, I have two books about NDEs. This is the second one. The Spirit World Talks to Us, 12 accounts from near death and other experiences. And I go through these people's near death experiences. Of course, this is why I'm going through Gone West, because all these things, they all interconnect. They all overlap with each other. They all describe the same environment in different points of view, different languages, depending on the culture, the time they were there, the technology they were raised in. But they all are describing a very similar place. So we may ask, is this one mass hysteria that, we're told by our culture today, there is no other world, that when you die, you just die. There's nothing there for you. You are just nothing. You just, you're back to your carbon base. Your body goes back to the planet and you are asleep or gone forever. This is where it's important for each of us to weigh the data and facts for us to believe, because before we can really start improving ourselves and our spirituality, we need to come to the conclusion that there's a reason to improve ourselves. Now, hopefully, basically, even many atheists are very nice, wonderful people because they believe in a system of honor, and it doesn't make a difference whether they are immortal or not. And to me, that is a very noble, noble thing. And those people will be rewarded. They will go to heaven. Although I would say if someone's an atheist, please, in the back of your mind, think it is possible that you are still alive with your immortal soul, because the spirit world tells us that if someone believes they'll be asleep and, not awake when they die, then it's very hard, and it may take years for them to wake them up and get them so they understand there is a spirit world. So now let's talk about some of the highlights in the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. This was one of them. There is not one single imperfection of the soul that does not carry disagreeable and inevitable consequences, just as there is not one single good quality that is not a source of joy. The amount of punishment is therefore proportional to the amount of imperfection, just as joy is proportional to the soul's good quality. So everything is taken as a whole. There is a balancing out process between what we accomplish for the good and what we cause or emitted for the bad. There is no wholly bad person, although it may seem sometimes to us. Jesus knows that within all of us lays the potential to rise above our base instincts and become what our destiny demands. Consequently, we aren't punished just to be punished. We are corrected as a good parent disciplines a child, with an eye for the child to learn the lesson and to not repeat their behavior. This is reinforced by another paragraph about the penal code. The spirit suffers for the evil it has done in such a way that with its attention constantly directed toward the consequence of such evil, it better understands its problems and is thus led to correct itself. Now, there's a scene in one of the books by G. Val Owen where this group of spirits come down into this city in the lower zone to help people rise, to leave the city, because a lot of them are ready to go to a superior location. And they come and they start talking to these people. And what they do is they sing this song, to help them about the spirit land, how nice it is. And he says that in this whole audience, some of them started crying, Some of them got to their knees. Some of them just could not control themselves. They were shaking. And the reason they were doing it, because they were showing this vision of a superior plane, but it brought back all their memories and what they've done wrong and the bad they have done to others. And it made them feel so sad, just so despondent, that it physically hurt them. Another instance where a, a, a man was trying to lead a group of spirits out of this one area in the umbral, the lower zone. And one of the higher spirits, who was invisible to the people, thought he would help them out. And the more immature spirit was trying to trace the sign of the cross. And so what this higher spirit did is he kind of let the light follow his finger. So there was a real cross there. And he said it was a mistake because the people saw that cross and they just fell in complete sadness and despondency. And he said it shouldn't have done that. He should have let that come on much slower. So believe me, a guilty conscience is painful in the spirit world. So there are wonderful things when I say thought is action, right? In the spirit world, oh, I can think what I want. I can create this, beautiful environment, this mansion, wear whatever I want, whatever I feel like. I can look beautiful, everything. That's all true. But what comes from that is everything in here is important. And that's why you really want to cleanse your mind of bad thoughts, of revenge, of evil. Get those people who you've had problems with, try to reconcile it if you can. If not, the spirit will try to reconcile it for you in subsequent lives. So I'll carry on with what was said in the book, Heaven and Hell. For those who have had committed crimes, the incessant presence of their victims and the circumstances of their crime are a cruel torment. For others, those who have committed the most heinous offenses, some spirits are immersed in thick darkness. So here's the case where the officer just came out. He was immersed in thick darkness. Others find themselves in complete isolation in space, tormented by their ignorance of the situation as well as the fate that awaits them. The guiltiest suffer tortures that are all the more pungent because they can see no end of them. Some are kept from seeing their loved ones, and all generally endure sufferings whose intensity is relative to the evils they practice and the pain and necessities they cause others to suffer until repentance and a desire for reparation bring them enough tranquility to foresee the possibility of putting an end to their situation through their own efforts. Let me give you examples. This one person who was in the book Liberation, he wanted to make money. So what he did is he bought ships and he transported slaves from Africa to Brazil. And he also had a plantation and he tortured, it was terrible to his slaves. Well, when he died, he was in this dark area and all around him, there was these other souls who were most probably his slaves who wanted to get revenge back because they weren't mature enough to let this go. That would just talk to him and just try and torture him as much as they could. Finally, this one slave came out and said, "No, it's time for you to go. Let me help you." And that was the slave who actually burned his tongue out. But this slave knew that revenge is not the answer, right? Because karma and the processes of the spirit world will take care of all that. So therefore, this is why you want to cleanse yourself of what you thought you've done wrong. Now, already I know I've done many things wrong in this life. So there's going to be a lot of pain for me. And just to let you know, all souls have a way out. They just need to realize the extent of their actions and formulate a plan to make right what they have caused. No better justice could be served. Not one soul is lost forever. All are guided toward the lighted path. Now, where do these punishments take place? Well, back to the law of affinity. And I shouldn't say the word punishment. It's really learning. The spirit world never punishes us just to punish, just to cause pain. What they're given to us are lessons. Now, to us, they may be painful lessons, but most probably we ask for them. And sometimes we need painful lessons because we are too dense to learn the easy way. I know I have. I've had to go through many painful lessons because I have been too selfish and too greedy not to learn what I should have learned. So, the law of affinity, this is the answer of why there's the lower zone and why there's the dark abyss. They're brought together. Now, but there are celestial cities up above them, and they're ready to receive good souls from the lower regions or wherever it is, and they're always on the alert out for those who think and meditate and pray and say, please, Jesus, please help me. Please, God, help me. So let me carry on back with Gone West. So HJL then asks JW, the medium who's with him, now, is there any other point you wish to raise? He goes, well, this is the third time I have seen this landscape, but I have never seen your guide. Is he never with you when I am here? And HJL said, so now we're talking about him seeing his guardian angel. HJL says, not always, but he is here at times. He is now. Oh, my guide and friend opened his eyes still wider. Then something was placed over my eyes for a moment, and I could see nothing. Then something was removed, and behold, I could see more clearly. Behind HJL stood a great spirit form made of light. His robes kept changing color and seemed to run through all the colors of the rainbow. He was far taller than HJL and large in proportion, being perfectly made. He was at least 3 times as large as HJL, and his face was more beautiful than any Greek sculpture. Strong, noble, well-cut features. There was nothing feminine about it, yet it was a kind as well as a strong faith. It was a face that was neither old nor young, nor did it seem to have color, or gold brown hair as we understand it, but rather to be a figure of golden light. Yet there was both hair on the head and the beard, majestic and flowing. No words can describe the majesty and beauty of this being. I can quite understand where the ancients drew their inspirations for their gods. Then I thought, this doubtless is an angel, and I looked instinctively for his wings, but he had none. Let's talk about what he saw. So he said, I couldn't see anything. And then something was placed over my eyes for a moment, and I could see nothing. Then something was removed, and I could see. So this is take place in other spiritualist literature. What happened is this far superior spirit most probably placed his hand on HGL and transferred some of his energy and his power to enable HGL to actually see him. Because a superior spirit can go down into a lower plane and be invisible, even to like a spirit from level 6 down to level 1. They can't see them unless he or she chooses to be seen. So that was probably what happened. It was he touched them, gave them some energy to help him, so he could see him. And this is even in spirits from an inferior level to a superior level. There's a story about a person on level 10, and he, for the first time, he was looking across a valley and he saw the spirit, and he just knew that was his guardian spirit, his guardian angel, which he'd never seen before. His guardian angel said, come across the valley and I'll help you. He said, well, I have to, I can't, because I can't, it's too bright for me. I feel too uncomfortable. He goes, don't worry about it. He made this bridge of light and he walked over the light, and then he kind of held them and helped him see what he could see, and made him feel much more comfortable in that, temporarily, in that higher, far superior environment. Now, the other thing is the size. Now, this spirit, who is the guardian angel of HGL, can show any size he so wishes. He was 3 times as large, and you see this in other writings. Some people could be 1.5 times as large, and then even people who are undeveloped spirits, or kind of what we call evil. I don't want to say all evil and like that, but they can be large because they have this focus of energy about them, is that they are strong and powerful. So that can be large because of their they're pretty bad, or they can be large because they're very good and they want to be large. All depends. Remember, this is all about thought, right? and logical constructs. And then again, there's hair on the head. It's how that person wants to look. Now, what you hear over and over again is in the spirit world. When you go into a type of heaven, if you died when you're old, you get younger. And if you die when you're young, you get more of where you want to be, in your 30s or 20s, wherever you think you want, or 40s, wherever you think you want to be. And you become more perfect. There's no, sickness or ill health of any kind. You never grow old. You are immortal. So then, of course, then he looked for the wings when he said this is an angel. Angels don't have wings. I think that people, when they had visions, when they saw this figure of light, and it was very fuzzy, depending on how they could see, in their eyes, it looked like wings coming out. So then he said, have I not a guide? This is what J.W. said. I inquired, and it was like the tones of a great bell rang out the word, behold. Then I saw that behind me was another great spirit of light. Now, though in general aspect he resembled the guardian angel of HEL, I perceived that I knew this spirit. His face seemed hauntingly familiar, yet it was an extraordinarily mobile face, the same, yet ever changing, never for an instant exactly the same, and yet always retaining certain characteristics. It was different too markedly from the guide of HEL. I knew this being of light. I felt almost as if I had seen him in my dreams, but that the dreams had been forgotten. He too had a beard, but not so long as that as HEL's guide, and like him, he was far more than human size. Light seemed to emanate from his body. He raised his hand, and that same glorious bell-like voice spoke. Enough, it is not well that you should see more. So again the hand, for I now perceived it to be, was placed over my eyes, and when it was removed, I could only see HDL and the landscape. So what would happen is that one spirit let him go, or at least he sent a message saying, okay, dial the energy of that medium of HAL down, so you cannot see us anymore. And again, they don't, when people go, and you see this in near-death experiences too, when people experience heaven and they experience the love and the wonderfulness of that environment, they don't want you to experience it too much, because then you never want to go back. It's just so wonderful. And of course he said this, he radiated light. Well, really what happens is they reflect light. When you are a higher and higher angel, the love of God reflects off you. It doesn't get absorbed in those black spots, right? We have so many black spots. Dark colors absorb light, and light colors reflect. And therefore, when you are a imperfect spirit like me, I probably don't reflect anything. I'm just this dark spot. But if you are someone who is a very, like Chico Xavier was, he probably was very bright because he radiated light. So then he was left, you can only see, what he could see again. So we must part now, he said, and floated away from me. So that was the end of that one. So his next conversation is, he said, he's talking about how people are self-judged. And of course, you'll read this in all the Spiritist writings, and you'll read this in NDE. But people, they keep over and over again, the central theme is that you are your most harsh judge. Let me carry on. I found myself in a forest glade and seated beside me with HGL. He said, I think it would be well at this point to clear up once and for all the exact relationship of faith and works. Faith must be shown forth in works. If a man really believes the teachings of Christ, for example, he will strive to follow it out in his life. Well said. Spiritism is not a religion, it's a doctrine. It's a doctrine of the way of life. First, it's the trilogy of religion, philosophy, and science. And as far as the science and is reincarnation and karma and teaching you about the spirit life. Then the doctrine is, follow the golden rule, study, be nice, right? Forgive people, Live that life. Make your thoughts clear. This is the important part. So then he goes on to say, a man who says with his lips that he believes that teaching, then goes on day by day, breaking all the moral laws that Christianity teaches, is simply a humbug. I do not mean by this the man who, though he strives, often gives way to temptation. For that man there is a realm which I call the realm of belief without acts. But I do mean the hundreds of professing Christians who make no attempt to carry out Christ's teaching, the men who go to church regularly on Sunday and spend the week in cheating and lying and so forth. These go to hell. They have not believed, and their evil life proves it. Now, let me stop there for a second. They don't go to hell. They go to the dark abyss, or most probably, if they just don't believe, and the vast majority of us here on earth, we exist within our culture. We may pay lip service to religion, but yet we really exist in our own little selfish world. We work to make money, to buy things, to please us. And I've been in this world, and we want to buy new toys, we want to buy new cars, because that's where our happiness comes. At least we believe our happiness comes from. It doesn't, but that's many people's belief, because we are bombarded with these messages. So if you're ever like that, you don't go to hell, no, but you do go to the lower zone, which can be unpleasant. And then JW, the medium, says, well, does this differ from being judged solely by our acts? And then HJL, the spirit, says, firstly, the word judge is misused. It implies that someone outside ourselves judges us. This is not so. We stand self-condemned. Our spirit cannot rise to higher realms than those for which it has fitted itself, the law of affinity. There is no necessity to enforce any law, for the law is self-acting. I shall make this point plain if I answer your question. The difference lies in this. Suppose a complete materialist, one who neither believes in God nor in a future life, and the one who does his best to dissuade others from believing in these essentials. This man may be a real philanthropist, actuated by a noble desire to promote the material well-being of his fellow men. This man dies. How can he come even to the realm of half-belief? His spiritual body has never been developed. He could not bear the light. He must develop the spiritual body and lose the materialistic ideas before he can possibly come to us. No hard judge dooms him to hell. He goes there naturally of his own accord. Now, I disagree with what he said. To hell, he's probably more in the lower zone, not as bad as that. But like attracts like. His lack of faith bars him out from all the realms in which faith is an essential element of existence. He says he there goes to division 5 of hell, which may be what he means by the lower zone. But though there was no love of God, there was of his fellow men, and this will help save him from sinking lower and help him desire to rise. Once a desire to progress in spiritual matters does appear, that progress will probably be sure and continuous, but unfortunately the materialistic mind remains materialistic after death. Often, it denies that it is dead and considers its psychic or its spiritual body to be a physical body, so that it is still alive on earth. Even when it realizes that it has passed through death, it may still deny there is a God and refuse to listen to anyone who could teach it. Thus, it will remain in hell. Nevertheless, the number of good materialists is far smaller than most people would suppose. Even on earth, many a man who outwardly poses as a materialist in the heart of hearts really believes and comes to our realms. Further, after death, such a man usually remains for a considerable time in his psychic body, and the conditions of life on that plane soon convinces most men of ease of the elementary spiritual truth. While on the subject of the psychic body, let me draw your attention to the fact that you have misunderstood the 7th plane in my chart. I don't need to go on with that. So there, that is what I was going to go through today. That is what we have talked about. Gone West, and so much information, and it's so interesting to see how HJL, right, who died, and he's talking to his, I think his son-in-law, J.S.M. Ward, what life was like in parts of heaven, right, and down below, and he wanders heaven. This is why these type of literature is so interesting, and there's so many parallels with Spiritist literature, and this is why I cannot recommend Spiritism enough for people to start learning, because you can understand the world around us, and to understand the world around us is to really grasp why you need to change yourself. Because when you come to the conclusion that the spirit world is a logical construct, and your mind, it really is the energy, it's the driving forth, the locomotion of all whatever created reality you wish, then you understand the urgency of reforming yourself. And in my opinion, I could be wrong, you do not have the option of dying and going someplace where your mind is completely alone and you're in your own universe and you construct your own universe. There's too many higher spirits, too many more dominant intellects that you cannot help but being affected by the construct. So what you can create usually can only be created within those other constructs. Now, there may be a time eventually as you rise higher and higher and higher where you can create your own universe and people it with whatever you want. I'm not sure. It could be a possibility. But here we are on Earth. This Earth is a campus. We all have to study, and we have to start learning to use our mind responsibly. Just like you don't let a 14-year-old kid drive the car. He thinks he can. He wants to. But, oh, heaven forbid, you don't. No, he's not ready for that. Same thing, we're not ready to use the full power of the spirit world because, I mean, look, any of us, I could go to a restaurant and get mad and, with the power of my mind, wipe out 5 tables, right? That would be something stupid. Probably I would do. I would go to Vegas and I'd make all the slot machines, give me a jackpot. Again, why? That's because I'm selfish and want money. That's how immature, I could be at this stage on Earth, this planet of atonement. So if you'd like to learn more, please read my book, Heaven Below. Please remember to subscribe and hit the bell. And I want to say, everyone, God bless for being with me tonight. God bless.